actually coaching anybody anymore. I'm still involved with the athletic department. I do a lot of the sports science stuff with them, force plate testing and the like. But I'm no longer coaching. There was a AD change, and then everything changed over. Saw the writing on the wall. Had an opportunity to maintain my salary, have a pension, not have to move my family. I thought, I'm going to do that. That's not saying that you never know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen. I'm not saying I'm out forever, but I'm out for now. I'm Associate Professor of Physical Therapy, and I'm the Director of Research at the Human Performance Institute. And well, right now, we're going to be talking about the non-contact ACL epidemic. And basically, honestly, it's the epidemic that never needed to happen. We see every year how many, during the NFL training camps, how many non-contact ACL tears there are, and how many there are with women's sports. Come on. Oh, I got to turn it on, don't I, Nate? Sorry. No, psh, dude, you know how many, if you hold your breath under enough heavy bars, you lose some brain cells. So conflict of interest. I got none. But throw it up there anyways, just because I got to get used to it. So let's talk about contact and non-contact. A non-contact ACL tear happens when nobody hits you. It's usually happening from a cut or an acceleration, deceleration, from some sort of change of direction. A contact ACL tear, just like what it says, it happens as a result of contact. Either somebody directly pushing you and your foot hitting the ground, twisting awkwardly, somebody rolling over your knee. So if we look here, this is an example of a non-contact ACL tear. And it's not available. Fantastic. All right. So this was Adrian Peterson. Ain't that about a pisser? All right, but that's all right. Adrian Peterson was going, planted his foot, ACL tore. This is a pretty well-known video, and whatever. This, fortunately, is just a picture. This is contact. How are you going to prevent that? Don't play the sport. That's how that's prevented. So some background on it. My first job was at Southwest Missouri State University under a guy named Rick Perry, who's the assistant for the Bears right now. One of my first sports was women's soccer. And whenever I was given women's soccer, I knew that, hey, ACLs, that's a big deal for them. So let's do this to prevent some ACL tears. Let's work on it. So we'll the vastus medialis obliquus, or VMO, that was like the big buzzword thing back then, and got to train the VMO, got to train the VMO. So that's exactly what I did. I targeted training for the vastus medialis obliquus, and if anybody doesn't know, for women's soccer, women's basketball, between 9.52 and 9.7 per 6 incidence rates. So meaning that, and that's 0.32 or 0.35 per 1,000 contact hours is the average. So that's what it comes out to if you just look at percents over a season. So roughly 10% of your team is going to have an ACL tear every year. So I make the VMO as big as possible. I can just train on that, terminal knee extensions, Peterson step-ups, all these things to blow up the VMO. The girls are getting a little angry because their jeans are fitting a little tight down at the knee. They're okay if they fit tight at the butt, but they get a little whiny if it's at the thigh. And it's just weird to have a bulge sticking out at your knee. But I'm like, it's going to be okay because you're not going to tear your ACL. We got this big VMO. That's what everybody says. 10% in the following season. So I'm scratching my head. I'm thinking, well, obviously, I didn't get the VMO big enough. So we're freaking, same thing. Now everybody truly hates me because they've had to buy new jeans. They've got to get the extra baggy. They can't have the normal tight fit thing going on because the VMO is just that big. It's out of proportion. It looks like a tumor hanging over the top of each one of their knees, right? So, but this is what's supposed to have the control of the knee and, creating the moment to counter the vastus lateralis, and this is going to be all that. We freaking had 12% that next year. So then I stopped and I scratched my head and I'm like, dude, I'm not an Einstein, but I'm doing what they're saying is this buzzword that's supposed to prevent that stuff from happening. And I'm getting more hurt. So I had to stop and step back and think. We've got to look at something different. Now, if we fast forward to Mizzou, I went 8 years with 0 non-contact ACL tears. A 9th year, we had 1, and she actually had 2 in high school. I'll chalk that one up. We also had 2 contact ACL tears. But 8-year period of 0. If it was 1 year, luck of the draw. 8, I think we're onto something. Now, what I had to do is step back and think, what are the mechanisms of the tear? What is the causative factors of the tear? Well, we know that the mechanism, there's a few, there's 3. Hip adduction, adduction, where, remember, you add back to the center line. So adduction, hip internal rotation, tibial anterior translation. These are the 3 mechanisms of the ACL tear. You'll see some conflicting research coming out from University of Michigan and Tim Hewitt, who's now at Mayo, and those guys just hate each other, and they say contrary things. Well, actually, you're not looking at adduction, you're looking at femoral internal rotation, which is done by blah, blah, blah. It's all the same shit, right? These 3 things, okay? These 3 things are the mechanism. So what does that look like? This. You ever see somebody do one of the jump stops? Makes me nearly want to crap myself every time whenever it's a female point guard or something and they end up doing that. They're doing like the Pee Wee Herman type thing, which you guys are, how many people are actually old enough in here to remember who Pee Wee Herman was? So that's, okay, not completely lost on everybody. So there could be some other causative factors too. Accumulated fatigue. It's not saying during the game, because during the game, typically they get tired enough to where they're not producing enough force to where there's not actually an increase in ACL risk. Because, you know, if I run into the wall right now, doesn't hurt. I don't have much force behind it. But if it's early in the game and I sprint into that, I'm going to knock myself out. So accumulated fatigue, and that's meaning acute chronic loading, not that initial type thing. So it's over the course of the season. Most non-contact ACL tears happen early rather than late in the game because of that amount of force that can be produced. Outside stressors. Okay, outside stressors affect the body. Okay, we know that Rick was talking about why zebras don't get ulcers, and we know that we've got that every stressor, no matter what it is, affects the body the same way because stress is a syndrome. It doesn't matter if it's financial, it doesn't matter if it's academic, it doesn't matter if it's a relationship, it doesn't matter if it's monetary, it doesn't matter if there's some short fat guy at the front of the room that all of a sudden goes, ah, real loud, and scares the crap out of everybody. The same sort of things happen. That that HPA axis fires up, exact same response happens regardless of what that input is. Here's just an example of this. We see that this is from the effects of academic stress on illness and injuries in Division I football. A is the slide that everybody has seen through. Does everybody seen those infographics from Yan Lemure? A illustrates that HPS is training camp, HAS is high academic stress, LAS is low academic stress or a normal week. In that, yeah, no kidding. During training camp, you're going to have the most injuries. You're going to have less during, you're going to have more during a test week than a non-test week. Everybody sees that. We look down here to the guys that actually played. Here's training camp to low academic stress, 2.84. High academic stress to low academic stress, 3.19. Okay? They're more likely to get hurt during an academically stressful week for the people who played than they were during training camp. You sit and think about that for a while. They are attenuated to the stress of the sport. But whenever you throw an additional stressor on top of that, injuries tend to occur. So additional stressors could be a factor with ACL tear. But what can we do? Well, long story short, the only thing that we can really do is work to counter the mechanisms from our standpoint. And we can also do some training. We can get them stronger. Do some preventative warm-ups, which are going to be the, we'll get to those here briefly, but that's basically that neuro re-education that you'll hear about from Hewitt's work, neuro training. So, countering the mechanisms. Well, if we know that hip adduction is a causative factor, what then do we need to do? Work the abductors. Work the abductors. So you want to improve the strength of them. Now, there's some different ways of improving the strength of the abductors. Some are good, and some, although well intended, actually make it worse. Because sometimes we try and dive into areas that are not our own and call upon exercises from something like a physical therapy background. And if you don't know how to apply it, you increase the risk of injury. So you've got to have appropriate context. Clamshells or the side-lying abduction, I absolutely hate these. And I'll show an image here shortly as to why. Glute medius. If you're in single support, and we'll see this in a minute, the glute medius is actually causing an abduction at the hip, which would be functional, closed chain. This is how the foot operates with the ground. This is how pelvic control happens. This is not a bad exercise. And you can add perturbations on top of that. Okay? Single leg standing, this is forcing abduction. Because typically what does everybody want to do? If they're in single leg support and they're not staying tall, they kick out to the side. If we look at where is my foot compared to the center line of my body, I'm in adduction right now. I've got to go back out to abduction to make it work. Now, here's the side-lying raise, right, for a hip abduction. And we can see the leg comes up. This is working abductors, right? Yeah, it should be good, should be perfect. But if we look to the side, we notice that she's slightly rolled forward and the foot is kicking forward. Now, we've got multiple hip abductors, as we'll show from an anatomical standpoint here shortly. The two main ones that we're looking at, tensor fascia lata, TFL, gluteus medius. Tensor fascia lata also, besides being a hip abductor, is a internal rotator. Okay? Remember, internal rotation of the femur was one of the mechanisms. So if I'm strengthening that tensor fascia lata, I'm strengthening internal rotation. So by doing a well-intended exercise incorrectly, I'm actually increasing my risk for an ACL tear. Okay? So what you have to do, actually roll back a little bit, have the leg behind, and turn off TFL to where you're working on glute abduction. Okay? Glute medius hitting abduction. Coming to the front, tensor fascia lata. Feel the athlete, actually palpate on them. Put your fingers on the front, your thumb in the back. Tensor fascia lata exists right off of the posterior aspect of the anterior superior iliac spine, about 2 inches back. Put your thumb there. Put your fingers back off of the distal to the posterior iliac crest. Feel where the gluteus medius is. Which one is turning on? If your thumb lifts up, guess what they're using? Tensor fascia lata. Now, I also have a question for you. In large groups, how easy is it going to be to look and see how are they rolled, where's their foot position, is it kicking in front of them at all, are they leaning into these sorts of things? For me, this is not a good exercise. It's not a good exercise because it is very, very coaching intensive. I've got to have my hands on each person, make sure the stuff's working right. However, if I can get them into single leg support, I can just simply look straight down the aisle. Oh, that hip's sticking out. Yo, Johnny, straighten up, tall, tall. Then we can work into different areas. We can work on our landing mechanics from this. I think this is a simpler means of doing it. We learn how to get into that single leg support, stick at it, then we can add perturbations. We can make them do leg raises, leg swings, whatever. As long as they're maintaining position, that is increasing the challenge of the gluteus medius. It is staying away from loading the tensor fascia lata. and we're going to have an improvement. Okay? So this is for the abductors. Now here is our anatomy. Here's the gluteus medius. I probably should have blown this up a little bit. I apologize. Glute medius starts about a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch down from the iliac crest. It comes down onto the lateral aspect of the greater trochanter. Gluteus maximus. This is actually not the best image of this, and this is a little bit incorrect. The upper third of the fibers actually inserts into the iliotibial band, which goes down and inserts into Gerdy's tubercle. Down here on the, just if you find your tibial tuberosity and you find the next bump over lateral to that, that's Gerdy's tubercle. Okay, that's the insertion of the iliotibial band. You could get on that right here. And then the lower 2/3 come in here into the gluteal tuberosity. Here's gluteus minimus, which is basically deep and smaller than the gluteus medius. And we see right here, anterior to the iliotibial band, coming straight down for about 1 inch to 2 inches, is the tensor fasciae lata. So this is, if you need the visual to know where to put your fingers, to feel for the palpation, to see if that muscle is turning on, there you go. Now, I've already went over this. Tensor fasciae lata, it is the one that is the biggest problem because it is what is wanting to activate. It is the muscle that is the compensation muscle. It does abduction, it does flexion, it does internal rotation. It does it all. It is definitely involved in sprinting and everything else because it helps to flex the hip. It helps to drive it up forward with the iliacus and the psoas. Unfortunately, whenever your glute medius gets tired, it does the abduction for it, but it also internally rotates. So it's two goods and a bads, but so utilizing it for abduction essentially recreates the mechanism for ACL tear. So if you strengthen the TFL instead of glute medius by doing clamshell, hip abduction wrong, you're making the problem worse. So internal rotation. Strengthen the deep six rotators. Okay, if we really want to know all about it, we've got superior and inferior gemellus, obturator externus, internus, piriformis, and quadratus femoris. Those are the deep six. You're not going to be able to feel them. You're not going to be able to see them. Okay? Why? Well, they're called the deep six for a reason. And they're down deep, plus gluteus maximus. These are the 6 muscles that are going to counter, 7 muscles, that are going to counter that internal rotation moment. So whenever you strike the ground, right? Now, I keep talking about strengthening. Greg Myers, Tim Hewitt keep talking about this neural re-education. The body follows the path of least resistance. Any sort of compensation shows up, it's because something's weak. Something's weak somewhere. People talk about, well, tightness, inhibition, blah, 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 blah. You know why it's tight? Why something else is tight? Because it's overpowering that muscle. So if you can strengthen things back up, you're set. Now the key is sometimes knowing what to strengthen. People talk about the strengthening the glute max to counter the anterior tilt. Depends on why the anterior tilt's happening. A lot of times if you think about it and you look at anatomy, external internal oblique going to the posterior crest, they're what posteriorly tilt the pelvis. Glute max isn't going to be doing a good job of that. It's a hip extensor. It doesn't have anything superior to the pelvis. So, nice little side note. But here are the deep 6 muscles. We've got our glute min, superior gemellus. Anybody actually care about this? Cool. There's your deep 6. Now, how do you strengthen that? Me growing up in the 80s, there was that infomercial, Suzanne Summers with the Thigh Master. You know, it was supposed to shape everything and you'd squeeze everything together. Well, I've got an exercise that I call the reverse Thigh Master. Why? Because it kind of looks like it, just from the simple action, where you'll have a mini band wrapped around your knees. You'll be sitting on the floor, knees bent, feet flat on the ground, lean back, get comfortable, whatever, and you do the exact opposite. So normally I had planned on putting in a video, but I just took some images. So we see Eric starting right here in this position, starting straight up and down, and then he rotates out as far as he can. He's got this creepy smile going on right now. I didn't say anything to him. He just started doing that. Now, we also have got the final mechanistic factor, and that's anterior tibial translation. Now, this is an issue because one of the jobs, the primary job of the anterior cruciate ligament is to prevent anterior tibial translation. We've got some other muscles, though, that are supposed to counter that as well. Let's see if this one will work. Here's some anterior tibial translation, if you guys don't know what we're talking about. Oh, of course. All right. You guys seen the anterior drawer or Lockman's test? How you would grab a hold of the tibia and you would pull it forward? That's what this guy was doing right here. Just making it go hands-free. It's kind of cool. I got my laptop in there if you guys want to see either one of those two videos. We'll check it out later. But what prevents tibial translation? Of course, the ACL. But we've also got the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, biceps femoris long head, biceps femoris short head to some extent. Now, how do they prevent anterior tibial translation? Well, if you look at the anatomy, you'll see that they start posteriorly and they wrap around. Now, on this medial side, this pes anserine region, we've got the gracilis removed. We've got, and we see how the hamstrings come in, they wrap around, and they go into this anterior portion. This is the front side of the knee. So they wrap around, and they grab a hold on the front part, and when they contract, what do? Well, the origin is drawn, the insertion is drawn to the origin. They only cost $20,000 each. So, I mean, of course, they should be accessible to everybody, right? So you can find ligament indominance through force plate testing with the drop vertical jump and how much force, if they've got excessive force that's going into the ground rather than what's being absorbed by the muscle, it'll be transferred in there. But there's also, I think that one of the best cues that you can have as a coach are your eyes and your ears. Whenever you hear somebody land and it sounds like it's freaking herd elephants coming through, I'm going to try and do it. I've got 2 bad hips that have been replaced, and whenever you're hearing that, that's a sign that their bones and their ligaments are taking the blow, not their muscles. All of the force of their body and the acceleration of gravity coming down onto that. So you've got whatever their body weight is times 9.81 meters per second squared. If they get up a meter high, they're hitting with at least 10 times their body weight. I don't know how long the second squared thing actually takes. I calculate ground reaction forces off of force plates. Okay, so I don't actually know. But I know that's a lot of force. So if you are a 200-pound dude, you're hitting the ground with a ton, 2,000 pounds of force. If you're hitting like this, your ligaments, your bones are taking the blow. That's a lot of force for something that's what, a centimeter wide, your ACL? That's what's stopping that anterior tibial translation? And your bones, something could break, something's going to give. Whenever they land and it's soft, I call it land like a ninja. The muscles are learning how to take the blow. Okay, now, if we can increase the strength of the hamstrings, we can increase the strength of the external rotators, we can increase the strength of the abductors. The body follows through the path of least resistance, right? So if we can strengthen those up, you're going to prevent the risk of going through that mechanistic factor. So if I can get away from the mechanism of the injury, what am I probably not going to have? The injury. It doesn't have to be rocket surgery. I was hoping for a laugh there. It's like rocket science and brain surgery, combine the two. Okay, sorry. I know you're hungry. Now, we look back at the NFL. Study came out, Orthopedic Journal of Sports Medicine, 2016. ACL injuries in NFL from 2010 to 2013. Most of them happened in August. Most of them happened in August. Why? Well, there could be a few things. Accumulated and not acute fatigue. Most, I talked about that earlier. However, what we're actually wanting to put here is that it happened during training camp. Unfortunately, something happened several years ago called the collective bargaining agreement. What were they not able to do? What were the teams not able to do at that point? Force the athletes to train. So you have plenty of athletes who you would think, well, these guys are professional athletes. They're doing everything that they can to enhance their body to do whatever. You know how many of these guys are just freaks and can show up and do things just because God blessed them with the gift of being able to go out there and do whatever the skill is that they do? So of course, many of these guys are like, why do I have to do all this shit? This sucks. I'm just going to show up and play ball. Since that CBA went in, that's an unintended consequence. That we're seeing rapid increases of ACL tears, Achilles tears, things like that. That goes back to the acute chronic loading. If they had trained all the way through, they're going to be quite a bit more robust. That training camp is not going to be a huge spike in their acute and chronic load. It's normal. Yeah, it'll be up a little bit. We're talking 5, 6, 10%. No big deal. Whenever it's not, and it just throws onto you, who in here has ever taken a layoff from training? I'm on one right now. I'm on like a 3-week layoff. You go back to squatting the first time. What happens? Describe how you sit on the shitter in the morning. Imagine that you've got that and have to practice that afternoon, the next morning, the next afternoon, the next morning, go play a game the night after that. Imagine what that is doing to the body. That acute versus chronic loading is real. Now, strength. Overall strength can be a mitigating factor for this injury. When stronger muscles are there, they also have, when they're stronger, it requires fewer motor units to do the same muscle action. Now, why is this important? Because when muscles fatigue, your body is a light switch. It's either on or it's off. Whenever that light switch is for those motor units turns off, well, that's okay. It's kind of like if we turn the lights off in here right now. It's fine. We got enough natural light coming in here. We're set. However, if it's dark and the lights go off in here, we're going to be reaching out with our hands in front of us trying to get to find our way out the door, right? Because all the motor units are off. So if we can get stronger, it's going to require less energy for each motor unit to act, which is going to allow us to go later on into the games, go later on into the season, etc. So when the muscles fatigue, you're still above the threshold. Now, the question that is going to pop through a lot of people's heads, how strong is strong enough? Well, there's a few ways to do things. The double body weight squat, that's a good standard to know how strong is strong enough. Whenever we squatted, we got up to double body weight squats, we didn't tear ACLs. We were also doing other exercises. We were doing a lot of RDLs, glute ham raises, a lot of things that were hip extension dominant that would prevent that anterior tibial translation. Okay? We do some curls too because you've got multiple functions of the hamstring. So, but the body weight squat, everybody squats or everybody trap bar deadlifts. So look at double. If you don't squat, typically people trap bar deadlift, right? 2 times body weight seems to be enough. And not only is it enough for the injury prevention aspect, that also happens to be the point at which strength no longer transfers to improved speed and improved power. So why try to go 2 1/4? Why try and go 2 1/2? It's like pissing in a fan. It don't make no sense. That's a lot of energy that's being expended for no benefit. Okay, so get them up to there. Now, some people don't test, and that's cool too. I get it, right? I get it. You lose time from training. You don't have much time anyways. So do a mid-thigh pull, isometric mid-thigh pull. Like, well, that costs money. It's force place, blah, 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 $30,000. You were just talking about that. Anybody in here familiar with a company called Pasco Scientific? If I told you that you could get a dual force plate system for $750, would you be interested? That's how much it costs. $750. Isometric mid-thigh pull. Takes 6 seconds. From there, you know how strong your athlete is. You combine that with a counter movement jump, and you can see how strong they are to how explosive they are, and have fantastic recommendations based off of training. Okay. Now, what's strong enough for men? 5 times for body weight, 4.25 to 4.5, depending on who you look for through females. Why do we have a huge standard for males, not so much on females? Professional rugby is where this test was very, very big at. I don't know if they have women's professional league, so they didn't have the sample size to pull from. Hence why it's 5 times for males. It's nice and solid. Women 4.25 to 4.5. Now, there's also specific warm-ups. And with the specific warm-ups, we've got to take into account and think about something. It's like, well, it's just general. It's warm-up, right? Well, here's the deal. If I ask you what are the proprioceptors in the body, what are you going to probably spout out? What are our proprioceptors? The ones that we know about as a strength and conditioning coach. Muscle spindle, Golgi tendon organ. Those are the two that you've got to know to pass the CSCS. And if you pass it, you typically forget that stuff. Why is it fresh in my mind? Because I teach this shit every year, right? But we have to realize that there's over 150 different proprioceptors, and there's some that exist specifically only in tendons and ligaments. And these things are called mechanoreceptors. And these mechanoreceptors have to be woken up. Right? They're kind of just there all the time. They're not on because you're not usually doing high-speed activities. Now, one thing that's in common for these three, the P4 ACL, Santa Monica, I don't remember what PEP stands for, pre-exercise program, something like that maybe, FIFA 11 Plus. They all have exercises in there that target the mechanoreceptors. Do they have the general warm-up component? Yes. Okay. Do they have change of direction components in them before you go out to cut for basketball or soccer? Yes. The last thing that they contain that most other warm-ups don't, and the other commonality, and talking with Dr. Hewitt, this is what I really think is tremendously important, is moderately high to high-level plyometrics. This, what does it do? Well, it engages the nervous system, right? And through that engagement of the nervous system, yeah, of course, it hits the muscle spindle. And we all think as strength and conditioning coaches, muscle spindle is the proprioceptor. There's 149 others, right? Those mechanoreceptors are very, very important, and they respond to plyometrics as well. So if we can engage that, we're set. Now here's an example. Oh, that's horrible. Todd, am I having a stroke? Can you read this? Charles? Well, good. Okay. Google FIFA 11 Plus. Now it has been pulled recently. It's been pulled because FIFA had some corruption going on, and they just started pulling down anything dealing with the old regime. If you can get your hands on this, this is a very good general warm-up that, well, this is a very good ACL warm-up it's bland enough to where you don't have to feel like you're going to have to like sacrifice your firstborn to get it done or something. You know, it's not out there. Some of these others, the P4 ACL, there's some weird shit in that, point blank, that might not feel comfortable doing. Santa Monica, it's okay. FIFA 11 Plus is the most general, I would say. But some guidelines for it. Always teach and reinforce the change of direction mechanics on a daily basis. This goes in with that neuro re-education things. So I've been doing this since I was a sophomore in college, 1998, as a Division I strength and conditioning coach. Realized in the late 90s things were a little bit different. It was one coach for 500 athletes. So he has a undergraduate student that happened to be a national world champion in powerlifting for Of course, it's kind of like it is now. There's like 500 different organizations, so, you know, there's 500 different world champions, but, you know, whatever. I was pretty decent at powerlifting. I was always ranked in the top 10 for my age and weight. I knew what I was doing. I knew how to teach the lifts. That takes some strain off of him. By my 3rd week as an intern, I had 5 sports of my own. Again, this is a different time. Craig and I were talking this morning. He's got, Craig, where are you at? How many assistants do you have?
1 full-time and 2 interns.
And 2 paid interns and then volunteer interns on top of that. So you're looking at 3 paid positions at a similar size institution now versus it was 1 and all volunteer. So we see things have changed quite a bit. Those, hit the wrong button. Now, always teach, reinforce these change of direction mechanics on a daily basis. The athletes have changed tremendously since '98, and that's where I was starting with. Whenever in '98, the kids that were coming in, they were like me. They grew up and they had Atari, right? They had Atari. How much Pitfall and Frogger can you play before you get bored? 30 minutes, maybe an hour, hour and a half, maybe. Of course, you know, if you were a stoner, you could probably play it for 3 or 4 hours. Hell, half of that probably wasn't even playing, you're just looking at the screen. Dude. Whenever Nintendo came along, and then Sega, and Super Nintendo, and PlayStation 2 and 3, and all this other stuff, well, kids will just sit there, and they'll just play that game all freaking day, and they won't go out and play. Now, those motor patterns are not being created. They're not learning how to absorb and reverse force on their own. These are things that we have to teach them. Teaching running mechanics today and teaching running mechanics in 1998 were far different. Now, why do I keep talking about that? Because in '98, that's about the last age that people didn't have cool video game systems. So after that, people were sitting around too much. Now, Mike Boyle and I don't agree on several things, but we like each other. And one of the things that Mike says, and it made me think about it, was if it's important, do it every day. If I can teach somebody how to change direction with proper mechanics, they are, 1, going to have a greater likelihood of success, and 2, have a greater likelihood of safety, of not getting injured. Okay? Now, if we go out there and during these warm-ups, we focus on the dropping of the center of mass, then the forceful abduction going into the proper direction in the proper manner rather than standing up real high, having the arm flail that we've all seen, or doing the 8 steps to go. It needs to be drop the center of mass, plant, and go. Now, why is the dropping of center of mass important? Well, we know that force is a vector quantity. So it has a distance and it has a direction and a magnitude. If we can decrease the distance, we're going to decrease the force that is required to change direction. So not only is it going to be more efficient by you have less force that you have to absorb so that your force overcoming comes out and you're going to come out faster. You also then decrease the force that's going on at the middle third of the lever, which we all know. If I take a straw and I push it on both ends, it's the center part that pops up, right? What's the center part of your leg? It's your knee, okay? So we're going to have decreased amount of force that is being torqued on that joint. Again, moderate to high level plyos to wake up the mechanoreceptors within the knee. Dr. Hewitt, while we were drinking one time, said that I don't know who out there thinks that line hops are good, but are we actually live on, right, yeah. Line hops ain't gonna get the job done. There was a couple F-bombs thrown in there. If we weren't live on Facebook, I probably would have gone ahead and dropped them. If you think that this is enough to enhance performance, you probably were drinking Irish coffee instead of regular stuff this morning. That's not enough force to do anything. You've got to have higher levels of things. So in conclusion, strengthen causative factors. Instead of having the river go wherever it goes, the force running like the water to the weakest position, strengthen everything, make it go in certain directions. Strengthen what's weak. Strengthen the causative factors. Don't allow those causative factors to happen. Get strong in general. Okay? Now, I've got a couple more minutes than I thought I was going to have. One of the best ways to know who needs what exercise, watch them train. Watch what happens to their knees when they do slow movements, when they do fast movements. The two areas that I typically look at are a simple squat, whenever I haven't taught them exactly how to squat. Like, wait a second, you're going to have them do something without teaching them? I want to see what happens organically within the body. I want to see this happen organically, not with what they know that I'm looking at. So let's watch them squat. And I'm not saying load them up on a barbell. For God's sake, just have them put their hands out in front of them and squat. Watch what happens. The other thing, get a 12 or 18 inch box. Have them do some altitude landings or maybe some drop vertical jumps. Watch what happens to their knees. Are they collapsing in? Are their knees shifting way forward? On either one of those exercises, what should that be? A red flag that, hey, these 8 kids over here are good. You 4, come with me. We're going to be doing some extra work. It's not saying that everybody needs to do a lot of extra things. I'm not saying that at all. That with those kids that were set, we're probably not going to see any greater benefit by strengthening those weak factors. But we'll spend the time on the kids that will have the biggest bang for their buck. Okay? Now, normally I have got a citation list that looks kind of like Gary's. But these 4 guys right here, the top 2 specifically, Tim Hewitt has been cited over 35,000 times, has over 300 publications, dealing with just the anterior cruciate ligament. I ain't going to put up 300 damn things. I'm not going to copy and paste that much. I'm not going to type that much. I'm lazy. Look at him. Look at stuff from Greg Myers. Greg Myers at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. The name might ring a bell because of that C-collar stuff that he's done some research on with hockey and the decrease of concussion risk there. Chris Nagelli has come out of their lab. He's now on his own somewhere, and Kate Webster down in Australia. These 4 people have done a tremendous job of looking up what are the mechanistic factors. They've done a tremendous job at looking at some different types of warm-ups that will decrease the risk of injury. Okay, so and also what I highly encourage you to do is to look at other stuff that's out there. Okay, go on PubMed, go on to Google Scholar, and just ACL injury, whatever sport. Look. See what makes the most sense to you and find the things that fit within your program, what fits within your philosophy already. Tim and Greg and I agree on a lot of things. All the mechanistic stuff, I'm 100% on board with. A lot of the exercise stuff, I think they're on the right track, but I think they kind of hit a bump in the road where they're doing stuff on Dynadiscs. To me, I'll just go ahead and say this because I've mentioned it to them. How many times have I seen a surface move in basketball? I've seen it happen a couple of times in football on our old turf because it sucked and the part of it wasn't anchored down anymore, right? Turf moved a couple of times there. Saw it. Freakier than shit. It's another time whenever you stop and think, yo, did you see that or am I having a stroke? Stroke runs in my family, so I've got to, always kind of look for these things. Swimming, the water moves, but the wall doesn't. We need to look, if they're citing specificity, we need to look at specificity. Sport is a chaotic environment with a stable surface, not a chaotic surface with a stable environment. So I think that we need to look at training as such. And we also look at the research on healthy individuals. Stone did a study, and a couple other people have done studies showing that training on that unstable surface actually decreases the speed of the proprioceptor, right? Proprioceptor's got to be able to fire real freaking quick to pull a joint back into position to prevent an ankle sprain, ACL tear, whatever, some sort of injury. So that's something to look at. So here's my contact info. Here's my email, manjb@health.missouri.edu. I put my Twitter up here. I don't remember if I was talking with somebody last night or if it was in the airport yesterday. I'm a part of athletics. I'm a part of the Missouri Orthopedic Institute, the Human Performance Center, Department of Physical Therapy, which is housed in the School of Health Professions. 3 of those 5 tend to have a lot of people that don't understand the difference between reply and reply all. So many days I'll get 300 emails. If I don't get back to you, it's not because I'm a dick and I'm trying to big time you and I think that I'm, whatever, because I've gotten people who've said that about me. I didn't see it. There's 300 fucking things there. I was probably just upset and hitting the delete key too fast. Email me again. If I don't get back to you then, while I'm busy, I'm not very popular. Hit me up on Twitter. Like, hey, did you get this? Nope, let me go look for it. I'll search my items and we'll typically be able to find it and go from there. Okay? There's my phone number. This is my office phone. Leave a message. I'm one of those guys, you never know who you owe money to, so if I don't know that number, I ain't picking up. So there's that. So guys, thank you for your time, and I know it's lunch. We got 2 minutes on the regular schedule, so I'm ahead by 2 minutes, Todd. Who would have thought that? So, any question? Oh, it's 12 minutes. I thought it was still 50. Wow, I went way too fast then. Well, let's pull up another presentation I've got here. Does anybody have any questions over this or anything else? Of course you don't, because you're hungry and you want to go eat lunch. I'm hungry too. So, Todd or CJ, we got anything?
What are some of your favorite exercises that you like to do to help prevent the non-contact then?
So, basically the ones that I do is I start out with, I like starting out with a side hip abduction standing. Okay, and I do the standing because I'm going to make them be in a tall position. And then this isn't so much for the glute med of the right leg, but it's the perturbation for the left. Okay, then from there I go into closed chain lateral lunge. Now a lot of people do the lateral lunge, they'll stand up here and they'll let their momentum come and then they're pushing back off for the resistance. I don't do it in that manner any longer. I'll start up here and I will do a forceful abduction with the down leg to throw me out. Okay? What is that working? Closed chain abduction, just as if you were going to be making a cut. Reverse thigh master is my favorite for hitting the deep 6 external rotators. Now, that'll do 2 to 3 sets of 20. Reverse thigh masters. Hamstrings. I love the RDL. I love the glute ham raise. I do those heavy, sets of 6 to 8. The hamstrings are typically the highest proportion of type 2 fiber that is in your body. Okay, why? Because I don't know how many people realize this, but 80% of the force for running, sprinting specifically, comes from your hip. 20% comes from your ankle. That makes up 100, right? You know what the force of the knee does? Keeps you from falling. That's it. Keeps you from falling on your face. None of the propulsive force during a sprint actually comes from the knee joint. There are several studies that are examining that. You can look that up. I'm not just up here smoking crack. I was drinking whiskey last night, but there's been no crack smoked in the last hour. I don't think, but I was in Todd's office, so who knows what he had in that vaporizer. No, Kenny, he didn't have a vaporizer in there either. I'm just playing. The guy from Colorado gets that joke. But no, I'll hit the hip extension on that heavy in 3 to 6 sets, 6 to 8 repetitions. One area that I didn't think I would have time to talk about that I actually address significantly is the ankle. Okay, and the ankle, if you have an inability to dorsiflex and you're going to drop your center of mass, where does all that additional dropping of center of mass have to come from? The knee and the hip. Okay, so if you have an inability to dorsiflex, you actually are at a 3 to 5 time, I believe is the percentage, greater risk of ACL tear. So now how do we improve that? Well, one is, there's a couple of different things. From a simple strength standpoint, what I like doing is a bent knee calf raise and make sure that we're getting full range of motion. By getting full range of motion, we're actually going to lengthen out the soleus, and that is the muscle that's tight. Anybody in here ever done an FMS? Okay? Some people are like, I don't want to admit that. FMS, that's bullshit. That's what I heard. Blah, 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 blah. Dude, it's a screen. It's a simple screen. It's a way to catch things really quick so that you can send them off to somebody else. It's not an end-all be-all. What do they do for the deep squat? Right, the thing overhead. What's the first correction? Raise the heels. Whenever you raise the heels, what do? Eliminate dorsiflexion. So if you've got guys that you're having to squat with heels on the board to have them pass on that, those are candidates for ACL tear. They have an inability to dorsiflex. So why am I focusing on the soleus? Well, the gastrocnemius, we know the origin of the gastrocnemius. It is the medial and lateral femoral condyle. So what does that mean? It crosses the knee, inserts into the calcaneal tuberosity via the Achilles tendon. Okay, so if the knee is bent and there's a tightness causing restriction muscularly, soft tissue, can't possibly be the gastroc, it would have to be the soleus. That's why I'm recommending bent knee calf raises. Focusing on the way down, full range of motion, lengthen that out, increase the length of tissue. Okay? So I really think that the bent knee calf raise is probably one of the most underrated exercises that we have. It's seated. And a lot of people think, well, it's a little muscle. Where's most of my force come from? Well, we just talked about that. Something that we never think of is that 20% of the propulsive force of a sprint comes from the ankle joint, from the calf. So there, you got a double whammy. Some other things that happen mechanistically could be that you guys familiar with something called the subtalar joint, and it's where pronation and supination occur from. Okay? Now this subtalar joint, it allows you to fall into pronation, which is the force absorption cycle of the gait. If it ain't coming from the subtalar joint, it's going to be coming from somewhere else up the chain. We've got this thing called the screw home mechanism of the knee, which allows us to, how many people actually, if you stand for a while, do your quads start burning? No. They're in extension passively because of something called the screw home mechanism, where you lock and you can just go bone on bone, and you can stand there pretty much all day. Usually your hips get a little tight, your back hurts, your knees, you go like this a couple of times and you're set. You just loosen them back up. They stretch because the muscles around them got tight. That screw home mechanism it ends up getting exacerbated by not having pronation and having a locked up subtalar joint. Now, stuff for that. My job, strength and conditioning coach. I'm punting. If the calf work and the direct stuff that I've done doesn't work, I'm sending to a physical therapist. It's not my wheelhouse. Maybe there's something else that's there. Maybe it is a bony block, a bone spur, that's preventing that motion. I'm not certified to test. I don't know how to do that shit. Somebody else has taken multiple years of schooling, plus education after schooling, after their DPT degree. And these people are usually called doctor, right? So they know a thing or two about those specific tests. Now, let's see. We talked about the hamstring. We talked about the reverse thigh master. We talked about the hip abduction. We talked about the ankle. Those are my go-tos right there. Oh, and the last thing on the ankle that I do is that's a go-to for me is I use the reciprocal inhibition of doing dorsiflexion. And what we'll do, take a red band, hook it up on a rack, put it around the toe, sit back, bring the toe back up towards your face. And usually they'll have a real good pump from 10 or 20 repetitions right there. Why? Because they never do it. It's a weak muscle. And a lot of times that it's either the reciprocal inhibition, which means that this side contracts so this side relaxes. Is it the improvement in the range of motion as a function of the strength or the reciprocal inhibition? I don't care. It got better, right? And I had no ACL tears. So I don't care what the one thing was. Was there one thing out of all of those? Don't know. Don't know. And to me, does it matter if it was just one? I'll tell you what, I'm never going to find out. And why am I never going to find out? Because that means that I have to go through and try and let people tear their ACL. That's how answers are found. Somebody else can do that shit? To me, that's unethical. If I know what works, I'm going with it. That's like a 10-minute answer for a 30-second question. Sorry, CJ. You can tell I teach class now. Anybody else have any questions? All right, guys. Let's go eat. I was going to say let's go drink, but it's not 5 o'clock yet.
Get some food. You go right out the door, make a right.
The
Go
fuck?
right there. Go up one floor. There's a cafe.